Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We are coming to you live on December 9th, 2025. If anybody in the webinar is a first timer for a Native Learning Center webinar, know that our Cathedra webinars get their name from the Creek word for learning. And today you're going to be learning to not make your Grantmakers do algebra and how to present clear budgets and budget justifications with your instructor, Diane Leonard, who is president of DH Leonard Consulting and Grant Writing Services, LLC. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also thrilled that you could tune in for the webinar with us today. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law printed here. So this is just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Moving forward, if you wish to return and maybe view the recording of this webinar, or if you want to go back and send the slides to somebody, or you just want to explore what all we have available on our learning platform, you can do all of the above in the courses section. I did include a link to the presentation slides for you already in the chat, and they are also in the shared notes section. I'll go over that a little bit more in a minute. If you attend another one of our webinars moving forward, you'll just log in during the webinar time, and as long as you're on at the right time, you'll see that green banner at the top of your screen telling you that there's a live webinar happening, and you'll click on that green banner to enter. We do ask that you join with listen-only capabilities because we are recording the webinar, so we just want to cut down on audio feedback for the recording. And if you find that the sound's coming out of the wrong device, maybe you're trying to use a pair of headphones or a speaker, you can come down to the bottom of your screen where you see a telephone icon on mine. It might be a headphones icon on your screen, but if you click on that, it will bring up a list of your speaker devices so that you can choose the right one. Even though we ask you to join with your mic muted, we do still, of course, encourage class participation. We want to know your questions. We want to know your comments. If there is any tech support issues that I can try to help you navigate through, we will do all of that through the public chat. If you don't yet have that open, you can come up here to the messages panel like you see on the screen, click on public chat, and that'll open up a chat that's happening between you, the instructors, the NLC staff, as well as the other webinar attendees. Whatever you want to say or you want to ask, just come down here to send message to public chat, type it in, and then you can either hit enter or you can click on the little paper airplane and that'll send it in. We do also have the shared notes feature that you can open right below the messages. There is a list of helpful links within the shared notes. We give you the webinar feedback survey link, again, the slides link. Diane has included a resource item for you, the grant budget storytelling guide that's also in there, a link that you can bookmark to log in easy in the future. There's a lot of good stuff in there. I encourage you to check it out at some point. And then if you have asked a question in the chat and you think we missed you along the way, you can always use that hand raise feature that's all the way to the bottom right of your screen. We'd love if you took a moment to introduce yourselves now in the chat. It's nice to see who all has attended the webinar. It's helpful for Diane as she goes through her material, but you can let us know your name, where you're tuning in from. It's always really cool to see the different tribal nations that are represented. Your work or your role in Indian country, it might have led you to the webinar today. You might just be here for your own personal information. And then your tribal affiliation, if you have one. You might be a tribal employee and you don't have your own tribal affiliation. That is okay too. You are also welcome. We're happy for everybody here. And then just a quick final note while y'all are introducing yourselves in the chat, do your best to avoid clicking on that red menu panel that's all the way to the left-hand side of your screen. You might not have yours expanded like in the picture. Yours might just be these little icons, but just know that if you do click on it, it's going to pull you out of the webinar immediately and take you to whatever you selected on the menu. You can just rejoin by clicking on the green banner again, but I just want to give you a heads up so you don't get pulled out suddenly. All right, folks, while you are introducing yourselves in the chat, it is with great pleasure that I introduce your webinar instructor for today. We call her the Goddess of Grants, Diane Leonard. And Diane, I have made you presenter now.
Makes me laugh every time. I'm like a little bad that says that. My family will maybe start to refer to me as that too. But thank you, everybody, for being here with me. And it's true, I love talking about all things grants. That's how I end up with nicknames like that. And today It might not seem like the coolest of topics, but it's one of my favorites. We are going to make sure that your grant makers are not doing algebra. And the way we're going to do that, we're going to talk about how we present a budget that is clear, how we provide justifications that give all of the details, show all of the work to our grant makers. I recognize some of your names, and so hi, it's really good to see you again. But I don't think I've met everybody before in different Native Learning Center webinars, so just a teeny bit about me. I have spent my entire career in the grant sector, first as a grant maker, was the program officer for the Michigan Women's Foundation, so working on making grants. I've been on the grant seeking side for, just a few weeks shy of 20 years. Woo! Time flies when you're having fun with grants. And budgets, they used to be the first thing that I would read when I was a grant maker. They're still the first thing I read today when I serve as a grant reviewer for whether it's a foundation or a government entity that I'm reviewing for. It's always the first thing that I still read. So it's one of my favorite parts of the grant application. Is it your favorite part? Maybe not. It's okay. It doesn't have to be. But my goal today is to help make it a little less stressful as you think about your grant applications, as you think about your grant budget justifications. And what would be really helpful for me to know, I told you that I'm a grant professional. I was a grant maker. I'm a grant seeker. I didn't say I'm a CPA. I didn't say I'm a CFO. I mean, I love a good little Excel spreadsheet, but accounting is not my professional background. I don't want to assume that it's yours either. Could you please let me know, is your role in your organization, is your role primarily finance? Go ahead and put F in the public chat for me if you're here representing your finance team or your finance department. If you're here representing grants, more traditionally the writing part of grants, go ahead and put G in the public chat for me. The reason I don't normally ask that question when we get started here with a grant-related webinar, but it's been my experience when we talk about budget stuff that sometimes your finance colleagues end up in the room with us. So that's part of why it's helpful. If you're here representing the finance part of your organization, let's put an F in the public chat. If you're here representing the grant side of the house, more the writing, the program design, the project design, let's put a G in the public chat. And if you said, Diane, what if I'm both? I could see that happening. You can put B for both. How's that? All right, it looks like we've got a lot of G responses in the public chat, which is going to mean lots of folks representing the grant side of the house. When we're done, Brooke is going to make sure that you know how to watch recordings. Plus, already she covered how you could see the slides today. You might want to take some of today's information and share it with your colleagues in the finance department. Might. I'm not saying you have to, but you might want to. So we're going to look at how we can make our budgets clearer, how we can make them less stressful, how we can make them a stronger part of our proposal. To do that, we're going to think about budgets that show our total cost. I want you also to think about what the funders format looks like. What is it asking? Why is it structured that way? Each grant maker has a different format and it's at their own discretion. So they have different reasons why they have particular forms and templates. And then we're going to talk about the justifications, how a budget narrative, a budget justification is actually a wonderful spot to enhance your overall application story. That's our plan for our time together today. I do, as always, at the end, have a Q&A spot on the agenda at the end, but I really, really don't want to make you hold your questions till the end. I would like to have you ask your questions in the moment that they happen, while we're on a particular slide, while we're on a particular topic. So the public chat, I have it literally, it's right here in the center of my screen. It is what I can see moving. So I will know if you ask a question. I'll pause as quickly as I'm able with my thoughts or my stories, wherever we are. If you have a question, please ask it in the moment. Now at the end, I will still ask you if there's any remaining questions, but let's try to get them addressed right away. So budgets. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1, I strongly dislike anything related to grant budgets. 10, I love talking about grant budgets. Could you please let me know your current comfort level on that scale of 1 to 10 in the public chat? There is zero judgment. I'm trying to get a sense, gauge the temperature in the room. So scale of 1 to 10, 1, strongly dislike grant budgets. 10, love all things grant budgets. What is your current comfort level on that scale of 1 to 10? And yeah, like decimal points, absolutely love it. Yeah, it doesn't have to necessarily be a whole number. It can be whatever you need it to be. All right, Cindy, you made me laugh. Thank you. Depends on the day. I would say it depends on the day, depends on the level of caffeination, might depend on the funder form. Yeah, fine. Totally okay with that. I get that. We've got a pretty wide range. I'm seeing everything from 2.5 up to 7. So that means we're all learning. We're all going to have probably some questions and ideas as we talk about today's content. Please help each other. If you've got a tip or a trick as we're talking about something, if you're willing to share, love to see it in the public chat. But also now that we know how many of us, I'm constantly learning, every budget form is different. I hope that you see that we're all learning about budgets and we'll feel comfortable asking questions, testing out an idea or an answer when I ask questions, but that we're all here learning together today. So we're going to take the words of our grant application. Those are what we usually think about. When people say we're putting together a grant application, what's the first thing that people think about or maybe even visualize? Words, lots and lots of words. They rarely think about the budget form. They rarely think about the budget justification or the narrative. Those often also have words, but you're right, they have numbers. It's the two that when they're put together are written application responses, whether they're character counted, word limited, page limited, whatever it might be, plus our budget and its related justification. Those two things combined are what equal our application story. So when we think about what grant makers are relying on to make their decisions, it's at the discretion of the grant maker. That's why I told you early on that when I am a grant maker, when I'm still sitting in the review chair, I return right back to my earlier habits of reading the budget first. That's my approach. I'm going to see actually the vice president of the Northern New York Community Foundation for a meeting on Friday. And Max and I have talked about application things for a long time. He does not read the budget first. He reads the section about sustainability first. Hey, his prerogative. I was on a United Way review committee, and a colleague of mine that was in that review committee, she's a social worker by trade. She works at a local nonprofit. And you know what she reads first? She reads the SMART objectives. So I'm not telling you that I read the budget first so that you think that all grant makers read the budget first, but you should assume that at least some do. There will be others that read more traditional words first, just like those other two colleagues I mentioned. But regardless of whether someone starts by reading in the budget or in the sustainability section or in the SMART objective section, they're going to read the whole thing. And so it all needs to make sense together. What you write in your responses and what you present in your budget, they need to not just be close, they need to be the same. Your budget and your budget justification, it's the numerical depiction of your story. We can't have variation. If we have variation, we have grant makers that have questions. They don't understand why is this one different than that. They are unlikely to speak up and advocate for us. Now, today's topic, I have the catchy title of Don't Let Grant Makers, don't make them solve for variables. Don't make them do algebra. I'm not going to ask you whether or not you loved algebra back when you were in school or not. I loved it, but that's just me. As a high school student, me as a grant maker, do not make me think about solving for a variable. You want me to remember how it is that I'm supposed to solve for X in an equation or solve for Y? Oh, no. Don't make me do that. I mean, I could. If I was really put to the test, I could get a cup of coffee and I could sit down and probably do some very lightweight algebra. I might also have to rely on some little, maybe online tutorials. So what do I mean by that? We are not, when we're putting together a grant application, we're not saying, oh, I'm going to have the grant maker solve for this variable, right? That's not what we're thinking. We are writing about our programs and our projects. We're writing about our community. We're writing about our tribal organization, and we're doing our best within a very short period of time to tell the best story possible. And then we're getting our budget information, we're getting our attachments, and we're putting it out. And so sometimes well-intentioned whoops moments happen. So on the screen, on the left-hand side, we got a red flag moment. Uh-oh. Our grant maker was asked to do algebra. If your application said that each item is going to cost $250, and so this budget line item is $5,000, why is that a red flag? Because we didn't tell the grant maker how many items it was. Now, I know you're like, Diane, that is not hard mental math. You know what? Some days mental math is just not what anyone wants to do. It's a busy day. We've got too much going on. You should never, ever, ever make your reviewer do any kind of mental math. And so that's why green flag moment on the right-hand side of your screen. Instead, what is it we need to tell our grant makers? The item costs $250, and we're going to purchase 20 of them, and therefore the budget line item is $5,000. You might say that is so like forehead slap basic, but best of intentions. We're moving fast. We're getting applications out the door. And this happens in, I would say, almost half of the applications that I read. Almost half. That's a lot. That's a really high number. And it doesn't mean that if you have, whoops, a detail missing that you're going to automatically get rejected. But, well, I'm wondering, go ahead and you can answer me in the public chat with a Y for yes or an N for no. Has anyone experienced an increase in competitiveness in 2025? Either you've heard directly from funders about their increase in their volume, you've read articles about the increase in volume, you've heard colleagues on LinkedIn talking about the increase in volume. Y for yes, N for no. Have any of you personally experienced it or read information telling you it's happening? I felt like we needed to make sure, like level set here. I need everybody to understand that with the simultaneous changes in terms of increased use in AI in the grant writing space, and also all the changes in federal government grant funding, foundations in particular are seeing a huge increase in the number of proposals that they are receiving. So we need to make sure our applications are as solid as possible so that we aren't doing anything that might get us kicked to the no pile. We want our applications to be stronger than ever. That's why this topic is so important. You might have a wonderful narrative. We don't want to lose a single point. We don't want to lose a single reviewer's desire to advocate for us verbally in the meeting. We need to keep everybody right there. We need to keep all our points if we're being scored, because literally 1 point could be the difference between a denial letter and $100,000, $500,000, $1 million, whatever it's going to be for your award. So how are we going to build these budgets and our applications in a way that helps us be as clear as possible to get, hopefully, fingers crossed, that grant award? First thing we have to do is understand our total cost. Now, I like it when you use your own projects for what I'm talking about in a webinar here at the Native Learning Center. So what I'd love to do is for you to pick the highest priority project or program that you have coming up in, we'll say, early 2026. So in the public chat, if you can type in a word or a phrase, maybe it's even an acronym, something so that I know, I'm not going to know the details of it, but I know that you have picked the project or program that you're going to use for everything we're going to talk about today. Go ahead, take a quick second, think about what it is. Maybe it's an after-school tutoring program. Maybe it's an infrastructure sewer project. Maybe it's a new playground. I'm making things up. You tell me. I will know that you have your program or project selected by the things you type at me in the public chat. By having that, we'll be able to move forward. So I'm going to give you just another quick 15 seconds or so to type at me in the public chat. What is it that is going to be your frame of reference? Now, Brooke did mention that we have our budget storytelling guide, and I'm going to talk about some of it as we go through today. You don't have to have that open right now. What I'd encourage you to have is either something like some sticky notes, a notebook, or a document that you can type into some notes. You don't need to be in the storytelling guide. We're not following that page by page. I'm going to be asking you some other homework questions that will help you, though, use that later on. All right, so I see everything from we've got some home rehab, recycling, teaching kitchen, construction of residential homes, online system for housing maintenance, getting elders and youth to work together. Amazing. Okay, so I know that's not everybody, but that's a lot of you that have told me what your focus will be, and that's a really wide range of projects and programs. That's going to be really cool. Okay, so we want to think about the total cost for what you just typed into the chat box. I would love to know, this does not need to be down to a very specific dollar or a specific penny, but what is the total cost for 1 year of what you just typed into the chat? Or for phase 1, if it's like a construction thing, what is it, whatever you typed into the chat, what is the total cost? I'm not going to ask you to type in all the budget details. I'm not going to ask you for proof. So just real fast shorthand, you could do some like rough rounding. You could say, oh, it's 250,000. Oh, it's 750,000. Like, it doesn't need to be super scientifically accurate. But I just want to get a sense, what do you know? What do you think is your total program or project cost? All right. Oh, 2 500,000s in a row. All right. Well, let's see what else we've got. Go ahead, type into the chat for me. What is the project or program cost for what you typed into the chat? Now, there is another option. If you're like, ooh, I don't know yet, you can put a question mark in for the public chat because we know that this is going to be your homework after today's session. All right, we've got a 900,000. All right. So we've got a wide range of total costs. And when you think about what you're typing in, oh, and Jessica's is more specific than anything we've seen so far, $177,000. Pretty specific number. I like it. So whether you typed $177,000 or 500,000 or 900,000, I thought somebody would be in the millions, but no millions plus yet. What is included in that total cost? Well, your programs and projects are all really different. Some of you, I would imagine, are more focused on the staffing, and that's the bigger part of your overall budget. For some, with like Greta and construction, I'm like, oh, all right, well, that's going to be a very different type of budget than if we're doing some sort of like more of a social services program, hands-on interactions, elders and youth working together. So you've got very different expense line items that you're considering. Now, I've got another question for you, though, knowing how different all of your line items are. How many of you are getting anything donated, anything in kind, space, volunteer hours, maybe some food supplies or some programming supplies? Could you let me know why for yes, we're getting some things donated, or we expect to get things donated, and no, we're not, or we don't think we are? There's no right or wrong answer in this. It's just, it is a thing. It is a yes or a no. All right, we're like evenly split. Okay, so some of you are, some of you aren't. For those of you who said you are, yes, you will be getting something in kind. You anticipate, whether it's space or staff or whatever, you're going to get something donated that's going to help you do your work. My follow-up question is the cost that you expect to get donated included in your total? So for example, because Russell, I see you said yes, and you said $500,000. So what I'm really asking is your $500,000 total project cost, does that include the costs of the anticipated donated items or space or supplies, the volunteer time? It should, because your revenue is going to balance it off in the end. So that's part of why, as we're thinking about our total costs, every single thing that's going to cost you cash, everything that might cost you cash if it doesn't get donated. And there's one other part, in kind, administrative overhead. And someone made a comment about administrative fees and overhead earlier in the chat. I don't remember who, but they said that their comfort and stress depended a little bit on what was being included for admin and overhead, which made me chuckle at the time, but is very true. Your total cost that you're thinking about that you need to raise, it has to include your administrative overhead costs, which are usually calculated as a percentage. 12%, 17%, 22.5%. I'm not passing judgment on what your percentage is. If you know your tribal organization's administrative overhead percentage cost, all the gold stars are ready for you digitally if you type it into the public chat. Not because it's a judgment against the number, but because you know the number. So I'm going to put oh, there we go. Nora's already got 20%. Well, I said gold stars. I don't have any of those star sheets that I loved from when I was in school. I do have my yellow dingy bell, though. I've got that handy, so we'll ring the yellow dingy bell. All right, if you knew that off the top of your head, Nora, that was so fast that you typed that in. Amazing. If you don't know it, you might say, it changes, and I don't remember it from year to year. Homework. Go figure out what is it right now. Figure out where you're going to place that sticky on your bookshelf behind you or down below your monitor, or where you're going to save it, like in your super important files on your calendar, whatever. You need to know what that number is, because you have to ensure every time you build a grant budget that it's part of what you are including. I'm not saying the funders are all going to fund it, but it has to be part of what you present as your total cost. So our total cost, it includes all the things. Those that are the supply costs, the construction costs, the staff costs, the telephone costs, everything. Plus the stuff that we think will get donated, but we're not sure. So we should plan like we're going to have to spend cash on it. And never, ever, ever forget those administrative overhead costs. The reason we're doing that, got this lovely little thinking character sitting here on the question mark. Folks are like, why? Why does it matter? Why can't I just build a budget that is for this grant application? When you're talking about your project or program budget, you should be 100% selfish. It should be only about what you want it to look like. What is your perfect design for that online housing maintenance system, for constructing that new residential home, for that new elder and youth program? Whatever it is that you're designing, your total project or program cost is your ideal. Don't build budgets only for a specific funder. It might be a funder that's the impetus for why you're talking about this application in the first place. I get that. But like, set them aside for a minute and say, okay, let's just think about our awesome work and what we want to do and what will it cost us to do it the way we want to do it. That's why we have some sort of budget form that's going to help us lay out all of our expenses. In addition to laying out all of your expenses, this internal budget form should also lay out all of your potential revenue. Even if you might say, Diane, I'm doing it as one big grant. I'm going after that big one. It's going to fund the whole thing. I anticipate only doing this one time. They fund it all the way or it doesn't happen. Okay, I'm not going to argue with you, but you still need to show that one grant maker. It's going to be pending and it would completely balance against your expenses. So I'm going to go back one again. let's look at our expenses. You told me roughly what was your total project or program cost. That was the summation of all the different expense categories that you as a tribal organization anticipate spending money in. But your budgets are really different because you've got very different programs that you've told me about in the public chat. I'm wondering how many of your tribal organizations have a standard format that you use for all grant projects when building a grant budget. This is a chance to humble brag a little bit about yourselves. Go ahead and let me know why for yes and for no. How many of you already have a standard internal format that you use for building your grant budgets? Y for yes. Maybe you want S for sometimes. Maybe sometimes you do, but not always. Or N for no. And there's no judgment if you say no. Just trying to get a sense of what folks are currently doing. All right. Oh, I'm so excited about the number of you that already said yes. But thank you for the candid responses. It's not everyone. This is a really good homework moment for you to agree on a format that every time you're going to build a grant budget, whether it's for something staffing focused or it's something super heavily construction focused, we're going to have an internal document or template structure that we follow. The reason this is so important is that it should be beautifully aligned with your accounting system. There should be no translation required. It should be labeled and structured in the way that means something to you as an organization, to your finance team. It's going to make it faster and smoother and clearer when you go to put it into a grant application budget later. But whatever that template might be, I want it to have expenses and all the revenue. Even if you think you're going to get it fully funded by one grant maker, you still want to have a revenue heading. You want to be able to put in the one line item because what you're trying to project, for example, it's $1 million in expenses. I don't want to have only $500,000 in revenue. That section is going to show me how am I going to put together all the puzzle pieces to get to the $100,000. I said 1 million, didn't I? All right. I'll stop giving. See, this is why mental math, verbal math, got to be careful. I just proved it. So we want our expenses and our revenues to balance. And it's at that initial internal template that we're building the case for how are we going to make this program or project successful. The different expense class categories that you use, well, although I want that form to be something that you as an organization are comfortable with, something that you love, let's go with some of the pretty common ones. At a minimum, maybe you're going to think about what we might see at the federal level. Those are pretty high level and generic. We sometimes see with foundations, with private grant makers, that there are many more categories provided. But, sometimes higher level is actually better. We could break it out into more detail if we had to, but these are some pretty nice broad categories. By having the categories, again, align with what is in your accounting system is going to make it faster and smoother for you as a team on this pre-award side. And once you get the award, on the post-award side. So as we think about these different categories, all right, so you made your note about which project or program you were going to be thinking about during today's session. And some of you even told me, what was your rough budget number? I want you to jot down or type out, depends on whether you were doing something in a notebook or in a physical document, a digital document. I want us to think about our personnel category. And I want us to think about what elements make a complete equation. So what do we need to know if we're thinking about salary? I'll get us started. You can think about, you'll get the sense of how we're going to talk through this with our different categories. For personnel, to avoid having my grant maker do algebra, I need for them to understand what? The position. And so like, is it one nurse or is it 5 nurses? I need to know the position, and I need to know the salary or the hourly rate, and I need to know the unit of time. 40 hours per week for 20 weeks, or annual salary for 1 year, or annual salary for 2 years. So I need to know quantity of positions, salary or hourly amount, and unit of time. If I don't have those three, our reviewer is going to have a lot of questions. They're going to feel like they have been left to solve a variable. If we're thinking now about fringe benefits, what sort of details will help our reviewers not feel like they are in algebra class? Does anybody have any ideas? What sort of things might help you calculate fringe benefits that are going to help when you show your work to a grant maker, help prevent them from doing algebra? What sort of things are you documenting when you're putting in information about fringe benefits? Go ahead and share some ideas in the public chat if you have any. So for me, thinking about our tax costs, thinking about the 7.65% on the screen related to FICA, yep, that's going to be the amount that we charge against what? The salary that we just talked about. So all those details from personnel, the number of people in that particular role at the very specific salary or hourly amount for the specific unit of time. Well, then we're going to multiply it by this FICA amount. Or maybe it's retirement. And so it's yet a different percentage that we're multiplying against our personnel salary amount. Under fringe, we might have 3, 4, 6, 7 different items that roll up into one fringe line item. But we need to be able to show for each of the benefits that are included, what was the percentage that was multiplied against salary? What was the percentage for which particular item? Was that unemployment insurance or was that retirement? Was that dental or was that a health line that was health and dental? Was it health, dental, and vision? We have to explain what each of the items is, what the percentage is, and how it was multiplied about personnel so that our reviewers can see how did we do our math to get to our total expense. Was anyone ever in a math class, ever, in any point in any of their schooling, where they had a teacher who said, show your work or you don't get credit? It was Mrs. Gerzone. That's the teacher that comes to mind for me, for the teacher that said it the most. Now, I'm sure many math teachers said it over many years. And in fact, I actually fact-checked that statement against my current teacher reference point. My sister-in-law, she's a math teacher in New Hampshire. And I was like, how do you actually say that line still? She's like, that's one of my go-to lines. Perfect. All right, then I don't feel bad saying it, that it still is a thing. It's not just me when I was younger. It's still a thing now. Everything we're talking about here for our equations is show your work or you don't get credit. It is like being back in math class. We need to know all of the details for how we got our budget numbers. But wait a second. When I asked how many of you were from finance versus how many of you were from the grant team or the person who's going to be writing the grants, everyone that answered said they were in grants. And perhaps some folks have shown up who are like more in the finance space, but it's a pretty heavy group that is all about grants, not about the finance piece. So when we think about showing our work, I don't know about you, when I'm writing a grant application, I rarely know all the details that are going to help me build the perfect budget as my first draft. No. So I actually start by having variables. So I actually want to go back one real quick as I tell you this story. So for example, I might know that there's going to be, I'm thinking about a SANE nurse examiners program, which is why I'm talking to nurses right now. But so I might know that there's going to be 5 nurses. And I might know that they are on annual salaries and that it's a 3-year grant program. But what don't I know? I don't know how much they're making per year. I don't know if we're going to put in the average. Are they all being hired? Are they being hired at the same salary grade? I have a lot of questions about that amount. So I'm starting with a variable. As the grant professional, it is my job to get those variables out of the equation, to get the numbers to be accurate, to understand the justifications. What details did I get? What questions did I ask to make that X variable go away? I knew how many nurses, I knew how long, I didn't know how much they were all making. So as I learn this information, I'm keeping a running document that has all of my budget design notes. It wasn't my decision to say how much they were going to get paid, but it was my responsibility to ask the questions about how much they would each be paid. So having some sort of reference document where you've written down and documented all your calculations. You might not use it in each and every application, but you need to have the proof. You need to have the shown work of how did you come to this grant budget for your application. All right, now let's talk about space and utilities for a minute. I had to do a square foot calculation the other day and I was like, wait, I can do this. And then I got to the numbers and I was, oh, but this is not mental math. And I was like, okay, I know how to do this formula. Yep. So thinking about the amount of space that we have, not all organizations are charging by a square foot amount. Some are saying this is the flat rate for our space, or this is all the amount that we pay to our landlord for this space. Others, your program has taken place in a small proportion of a very large building, and so they've created a square foot allocation. All 3 scenarios I just described could be fine. But you can't let your grant maker assume how it is that you know what your space cost is. So we need to show them. We need to tell them. And even if your space is being donated to your program, you need to know what is its fair market value for what's being donated. And that fair market value is what goes in your total budget. You're going to balance it out by putting it on in-kind revenue later. You still show all your work. This is how much it would cost us if we had to pay for our space. There are, we're not going to go through all the direct costs because, well, we could sit here and talk about those examples all day. That could take our entire time together. Anytime we're laying out a cost, we're buying laptops, we're buying rolling whiteboards, we're buying after-school snacks. Well, how many snacks? And for how many children? And for how many days? And on average, each snack is what? Not like a quarter per snack. Maybe it is. I don't know. I would say maybe it's 75 cents per snack. I'd be making up guesses. I need to have proof. Here's how much it's going to cost. So whatever it is you're buying, what are recent receipts that you've spent that show what the cost is, or what is a quote that you received that shows what the cost is? The bigger the item, maybe you want to have a few quotes to kind of prove your point. You need to be gathering all your proof about what it is that this is going to be and what it will cost you. That way you are ensuring that you have gathered the data to take out all the variables in your justifications. By having all of your proof, having all of your data for the program or project cost, then we can talk about those fun indirect costs. And okay, so it was Russell before in the chat, chimed in again to say that was him that mentioned the indirect cost before. And so when we think about what we're trying to get with our indirect cost, these are the expenses that keep the lights on and the doors open. So the indirect costs, some of you knew your percentage, not everyone. That's not a problem, but it's a good homework item. Figure out what it is. So if we're trying to put our indirect costs into our budget, well, how do we not show a variable there? Our total cost for the project or program for our direct expenses, the things we would have to pay cash for, is fill in the blank. I'm going to say 500,000 because it is a nice round number and some of you already said it. And then if your indirect cost is, we'll say 10%. I get that it's low, but that's nicer mental math for me. If it's 10%, what does that equal? 50,000. So we can see that the three elements. Here was our total cost for direct. Here is our percentage that we charge for indirect. Therefore, this is our indirect cost that we're going to put in our budget. Sum those two together, our direct and our indirect equals our total project. Pretty basic, right? Now you know your total cost and you can start to ask for either the whole thing or you can start to ask for puzzle pieces of it in order to fund the work. I want to sidebar real quick to indirect because I usually get a lot of questions about it. So I thought let's just a little sidebar here about it. When you are looking at your indirect cost rate, and this is a spot, quite frankly, where a lot of tribal organizations have an advantage over like a 501c3 organization. Many of your organizations already have federally approved indirect cost rates. They are a lot of work to get, and they are a lot of work to maintain, but many of your organizations already have them in place. And so that makes your answer, whether it's for a federal grant, a state grant, or a foundation grant, it makes your answer rather fast. Grantmaker, here is the justification. This is my federally approved indirect cost rate. It is what it is. Therefore, I used it for my calculation. If groups don't have a federally approved indirect cost rate, then they're going to rely on their annual IRS filing to show their functional expenses and prove how they calculated what their administrative percentage is. So I actually want to ask you this question. I'm going to put a delineator in the public chat. How many of you know if your tribal organization has a federally approved indirect cost rate? I'm not asking you what the percentage is this time, just if you know if you have a federally approved indirect cost. Why? For yes and for no, question mark, if you're not sure. Okay, so many of you do. And did you know that that's an advantage in terms of the amount of time and effort it takes for building your grant budgets? Because it's a known entity, it's a known number, it's a known factor. You say that, and grant makers of any other shape and size, they say, okay. It doesn't mean they're going to pay it in its full detail. They might say, we only will pay you 10%. We'll only pay you 15%. That's their prerogative at the foundation level. But that's an advantage. You don't have to go digging. You don't have to agree on it. It is your total cost. They may or may not pay for all of it, but it is a factual thing that you can quickly use in building your budget. Now, once you're in the budget forms themselves, this is a quick little screen grab from a foundation that's in the state of New York. It's the Mother Cabrini Health Foundation. And part of why I like to use them as an example is that they will, in their form, ask you, what is your total cost? And they'll ask you, what is your total indirect cost? And they'll pay up to 15%. That's pretty high. A lot of foundations say that they stop at 10%, even though the federal government went to 15. A lot of foundations still were sticking around at 10. But their budget, part of what I love about it, not just that they fund at a higher level than many foundations for indirect cost, but if you went over their allowable percentage, the cell in their Excel budget template turns red. They've got some nice little macros behind the scene that make it turn red and say, hey, whoa, you are asking for too much from us for indirect cost. We won't do that. A lot of grant makers don't have that built in, so we have to do the math to make sure that we're staying within their limits. But what Mother Cabrini Health Foundation never argues about is what your total indirect cost rate is, because it's factual, because you show them how you got that number, you tell them how you got that number. That's not what they argue about. That cell doesn't turn red. The only thing that turns red is about what part of it are you asking for. So our total cost budget This is you doing all the work before you ever consider turning your math test into your math teacher. You've laid out all your answers, you've got your scratch paper, you've got all your ideas done, you're thinking about turning it into your math teacher, but you're like, wait, I just want to double check my work one more time. I want to make sure that there's not a single variable anywhere in my notes, that I have every component that I could walk through with a calculator, like a super, I don't even have one at my desk. I was going to show you one. Isn't that funny? When was the last time I had a real calculator? Right here, long time ago. But like open a real calculator and just type in basic math, not a scientific calculator, a just super straight 4-function basic calculator. You need to have all the details that that's all you need to double check your math. Once we've done that, now we can think about the specific grant makers. But your homework step is setting you up for success. That should be actually where you spend most of your time, is getting your budget document right first. Remove every variable. This next part, I'm not going to say it's easy. It will be easier. It will be faster because you've done all your work. Now we're going to take your work and we're going to turn it into the grant maker's form. We're going to turn it into the format that means something to them. But you just spent all that time building your own budget document, getting your numbers right. What does that mean? Is that no longer relevant? Oh, no, that is the foundation of everything that you're doing. It is what you are translating from. You will not change your numbers. You might have to smush some categories. You might have to separate some categories. You might say it's more like you're deconstructing some of the categories because it'll depend on the grant maker's form. But once you look at the numbers and you do your sums across your rows, down your columns, it's all going to be the same. You're not changing your overall budget, just that you're translating it into their structure, into their form. I want to show you a few different things that might come up, some things that might make it a little stressful when you think about how will you translate your hard work into the grant maker's template. So because you're working with your structure, whatever it is, and I know I'm certain, I feel really certain that what's on the screen right now is not exactly what any of you have for your structure. But you know what yours looks like, so that's what matters. So you have your budget format that you as a tribal organization, you and your colleagues have agreed on. This is what our budget looks like. This is our total cost. You've got your expenses, you've got your revenue. Here we go. We are getting ready to translate to the grant maker form. And wait a second, I thought this was going to be easy. What is on the screen looks nothing like our budget form. Absolutely nothing like it. Now what? Now what? Okay, so the good news, you know who you are, you know what your costs are, you know what your different variable elements are, and you need to decide, how do we translate from ours to theirs? So you need to keep track of what you expand or what you smush and contract into a specific line item, so that if the grant maker or any of your colleagues have questions, you can follow your work about all the steps that you did. This now, I'm going to make another math class reference. I loved math back in high school. Loved it back then. And like the idea of doing, we used to do like these proofs in geometry, these big documents where you would prove all these things about triangles. That's as much as I can tell you about it. But there were all these steps that we outlined. And I was like, yeah, but it's a triangle. You need to outline every step you take when you translate your budget form to the grant maker's form. That's my math class analogy, is that every step you take, you're not going to show the grant maker. They don't care. They care that the numbers are accurate. They don't care what the steps are for how you translated your agreed upon grant or project budget into their form. They're not going to ask you. But you need to know so that when you get funded, and you go to worry about grant reporting on your finances, that you can follow exactly those same steps for how you report out of your financial system to theirs. That's why this is so important. You're making your post-award work less stressful. You're making your post-award work more successful. You're increasing the odds that the grantmaker will fund you again. So we see our work, we know our form, then we see the grantmaker's template. Now this one doesn't look quite as different, but it really doesn't have as many line items, does it? Salaries and benefits, technical term, smushed. It's not separate. Well, that one actually is, I mean, of all of them, maybe that's kind of easy. I'm going to take my salary line item. I'm going to take my benefit line item, sum them together, and put it in there for my total. And you might say, I would always remember that I did that. I don't know about you. I'm at an age where I write everything down because there's just too much to remember. So I don't want to risk that I won't remember. Write everything down, even if it is as obvious to you now that we condensed or we smushed salaries and benefits into this one line item. Write it down as part of your steps for how you took your budget and made it work in their format. And you might say, oh, consumable office supplies. Good to go. Printing. Oh, we didn't have that called out. Do we have any printing? Postage. My gosh, we haven't mailed anything for this program in 2 years. Everything's email. Fine. Put a 0 in. That's fine. Marketing. Marketing. Well, we have that paid intern whose job in the summer is to do social media. Does that count? Right? You might say, oh, well, I'm going to pull that out of salaries, and therefore I'm going to put it down here in marketing since that's one of their line items. Whoa, that's okay, but you're making a translation. Write it down so that you remember that you took this person out of salaries and benefits and you put their intern contract time into marketing along with the printing costs for some posters or whatever it is, right? See what I'm saying? Every single part of the conversation for translating your agreed upon thing to their structure, you need to write down because you might be accidentally creating algebraic equations if you're not careful. Oh, and then there's that lovely overhead line. Well, we already talked about it. You already have it in your internal form. Therefore, put your total cost in that first cell and then your request. It might be all of it or maybe not. So it looks, I mean, this form looks really simple, doesn't it? But because it's not all of your likely expense class categories, and some of them are clearly condensed class categories, you were translating. So I would hope that you have a nice, clean list of what you translated. Now, I did include, I forgot that I did this. I showed you that Cabrini example. I said how much I liked their template because it will turn a cell red if you ask for too much. It's really rare that a grantmaker has such a clear indirect cost rate policy if we are in the private foundation space or the public foundation space or the corporate foundation space. This clear of an indirect cost policy in those scenarios is rare. In the government space, pretty clear. Foundation side, not so much. So you might have to look for them. You might have to sleuth a little bit to see if you can find them. If you don't find a cost policy and you're trying to figure out how much of your true cost you can ask for, and it's not in the guidelines, I would reach out to the grantmaker via phone or email and I would ask. Now, earlier in your internal budget form, I asked you to make sure that when you build your full expenses, you document all the revenue components that are going to make them equal, even if there's multiple pieces. And the reason I want you doing that up front is because you might be asked questions or given instructions like the ones on the screen now. The grant maker wants your income to equal your total expenses. The reason that they want that to be the case is so that they're not giving you money that puts you in a place of surplus. They're not giving you money that you don't need. So they would expect that you're going to balance your budget. Revenue and expenses should be the same. By doing that work up front, now you have it right at the ready to type in, here's what's pending, here's what's already committed, here's this other thing that's going to be pending, and oh, here's all of your money. All of your money right here. Yeah, that's what makes us equal. That's helping them to see now a formula about all of the revenue that it will take to equal your total expenses. Again, we don't want to have some weird variable. And the variable in your revenue section, if you said, it's going to cost us $500,000, dear Grantmaker, I'm asking you for $200,000. And they're like, and what? Who else? If you don't talk about it, if you don't show the other revenue, that is one big unknown variable. Who else for how much? Whole big unknown gray space that we could represent as a single variable. So even your revenue side needs to show the full detail that you have available. Show your work, even if it's pending, which means not awarded, not committed. It means submitted, still waiting to hear, not a guarantee. Telling them that removes the unknown variable from your revenue picture. We talked about in-kind real quick in the public chat for a minute, and some of you have in-kind revenue that's coming in to support your projects and programs. This budget form in particular, I love because it has it right within the template. Not all grant makers do that. If they do, it doesn't mean that you have to show them in kind. It's a factual thing, yes or no. We have some or we don't. It's not that they expect that you have it. But the reason that many grant makers will put it in is so that you're remembering to use it to balance. In kind is not only something that happens on the income side. What is being supported in an in-kind way on the income side has to have a balancing expense. This time, the budget form from the grant maker had income above expenses. Fine. Sometimes grant makers put expenses above income. Fine. Doesn't matter which way they order it. The point is that if you have in-kind as a revenue, you have to show the balancing expense. In-kind doesn't boost you and mean, oh, now I don't have to find, right? Now I can have an unbalanced budget. Nope. They're going to just zero each other out. So that's why they have the in-kind both as a heading for income and expense, the way that this grant maker built it. My sidebar about in-kind is that you're going to have to report on it. If you tell a grant maker that you're going to get in-kind support, therefore you won't spend cash on it, you need to be able to prove to the grant maker that you received that support. So I usually recommend that if groups want to include it, that if they haven't already, they talk to their CPA or they talk to their auditing firm to make sure they know how that's going to be tracked and reported in annual financials. Otherwise, grant makers start to ask a lot of questions. Talk about a teeny tiny budget. Let's just talk about it for a second. Wow. Salaries and benefits, consumable supplies, occupancy, communication, staff training. 5 line items. I'm pretty sure you don't even have to tell me why for yes and for no. I feel pretty confident that your grant program and project budgets have more than 5 expense line items. So that's a lot of translation, isn't it? But you have your budget, and now you're going to make your notes. Here's how I took that budget form that we already agreed upon, and here's how I fit it into this particular budget form. Here's how I did that. You're leaving yourself a little trail of notes to follow back. Once you get awarded, you can go step by step to see what you did so that you can start implementing and be ready to report to the grant maker. But there's something pretty unique about this particular form that I wanted to flag, and that is that it calls out committed revenue only. So this is actually the opposite, and it's rare, but this is the opposite of what I showed you a few minutes ago where the grant maker said, make sure that your expenses and your revenue, that they balance. This grant maker is saying if it's not already committed, which means either award letter in hand or money in the bank, if it's not already committed, don't tell us about it. Nope, it's not a guarantee. Don't tell us about it. I think that's extremely interesting. And again, it's rare. Most grant makers want to give you the chance to show the whole picture. But what this grant maker is trying to understand is how likely is this project to happen the way that you've designed it? And how soon is it likely to happen? If they see that you only have 10% of your revenue committed of your total project, and you're only asking them for another 10%, I'm making up very low numbers, they're not going to feel really confident that it's going to happen because that unknown X variable, who else is going to fund it, is huge. On the other hand, if you had a $100,000 total cost project and you showed them that you already had, I'm going to say $80,000 committed, so you're 80% of the way there, and what you're asking them for is the final 20,000, oh, that math is beautiful. There's no variables in there. They're like, it costs 100,000 total. You have 80,000 committed. You want 20,000 from us? Yeah, no, that maths. That's good. Let's do that. So they were looking at really they were trying to mitigate their risk. They wanted what they funded to actually have happen, and that's part of why they're looking at total cost. What do you already have committed? What is that unknown amount that's still left to be funded? It is a known amount, but who's going to fund it is unknown. That's what they were trying to understand. So the different formats for the different grant makers are designed in the way that is most meaningful for them. I didn't get into federal grant budget forms, and my goodness, if we looked at state budget forms, we'd be down a totally different whole rabbit hole because there'd be more than 50 different examples of what we'd be talking about for structure. But the government applications tend to give you more space to show your work or to provide a justification. And that's why I didn't want to talk about the forms there because I know you're going to get to give proof in almost all those cases for how you got your numbers. The showing of proof is more rare in the foundation space. And so the way you translate into their form is more important. So that's why I wanted to talk about it the way we just did. When we talk about government budget forms, now this is where we're going to turn in our worksheets, our little scratch sheets like we might have had in math class during a test. We're going to turn those in as part of our grant application. So it won't be only, air quotes, only about how we took our budget numbers and put them into their budget form. That is still important, but now it is how we took our budget numbers, put them into their budget form, and how we demonstrated what our work was to get those numbers. So if we said in our grant justification or budget narrative, grant makers call them both, if we said in that supporting information, we're going to spend $15,000 for staff for the program. That is factually accurate. Can't be mad about the fact that it's factually accurate. But which one is going to make the grant maker more excited? What I just read, or telling them that 300 hours of work will be provided by the program manager at the hourly rate of $50 an hour? You know what? I don't want to assume that I know which is best for everyone. Could you let me know number one or number two? You can tell me which one you like better. $15,000 for staff. You can type the number one into public chat. Option two, for what you could type into the public chat, you could type the number two if you like 300 hours for a program manager at $50 an hour. Which one is clearer to you as a budget justification? Which one do you think the grant maker is going to like more? Number one or number two? All right, you're like, Diane, that's obvious. You even said instead of try this. Yes, because number two, there's no variable involved in there. In the first one, How many staff? How much is that, like their whole annual salary? Is it a stipend? I have questions. Did you hear me asking all those questions as if I was a grant reviewer? Grantmaker questions are not your friend when they're reading your budget. They're going to make you lose points, or they're not going to verbally advocate for you during a meeting. Not what we want to have happen. We want to answer all the questions so it's super clear how many people and how much for how long. When you're thinking about how you just built your budget on your internal budget form, some folks will say, I'm going to just quick get all my numbers done, and then I'll come back. I'll remember all this. I'll make my notes later. That sounds like such a well-intentioned statement. And it might not be you that you have to convince. Sometimes it's your well-intentioned colleagues who are helping to pull information and say, oh, just put 15,000 in there for now. Now, I used the word just, which was to flag you that like, whoa, oh, wait, hold on, I have a yellow flag. Yellow flag, caution, hold on. We need to do it now. Because if we have to try and find our colleagues and ask them how they got that number, or where'd that come from? You told me 15,000 for staff. Could you tell me what the details are? What was I thinking that particular Tuesday at 1 as I ran towards the coffee machine to get a new cup before a meeting? What was I thinking? Do it now, right? Like get the information, ask all the details. Don't ask people as they're running by. I get it. Sometimes they're hard to find, but gather all your information now. Don't put in best estimates into your draft budgets because the risk is that they're going to stay there and they're going to look like just best estimates. They might make it through some editing processes and they might end up in the hand of the grant makers. So when I told you I leave variables in my draft, I just want to be super clear. If I do it, I'm like, I need this piece right here. I need to know how many people, or I need to know how much their salary is, or how many laptops. If I put a variable, some sort of placeholder in my document, it is highlighted in some really super bright color. It's got a comment in the margin. So like, it's very clear. Hey, there's flashing lights around it. This is not done. I might have built the structure so that I could ask people at a meeting so that they can document it for me like as soon as possible. But don't just put in, oh, somebody in the meeting said, they think like 15,000. Do everything you can to document it in the moment, not to try and catch up on it later. What you're really creating is something, it's called technical debt. The idea that you owe that to yourselves as a team, that's not the kind of debt any of us want. No. Instead, that makes for stressful to-do lists. Now, as you're building this budget narrative, we talked early on, I was talking about how your narrative, it says one thing. And your budget, it says some more things. And together, they have to equal the same story. They have to tell the same story. They have to build on the same idea. When we look for consistency between narratives and budget forms, it's not that the numbers aren't the same, it's that the story is different. And the reason the story can be different is because a programmatic person is writing the narratives and somebody in finance is writing the justification about how they got all those magic numbers. Don't worry, you don't have to tell me if that's how it's happened in your organizations before. I have seen it and lived it many times. And big picture, I don't have a problem with it because that's who the experts are. But you have to, at the end, have a quality control moment about the consistency between the two. So a quick story about an example, how what we talk about in the narrative should be in the budget and vice versa. And maybe you've heard me use a story like this before. I live in a very rural part of far, far, far upstate New York. And I'm right on the Thousand Islands area, right on the tippy-top border of New York State. We don't have public transit up here. Occasionally in the summer, we might like get some well-intentioned Uber who wants to be up here during like tourist season. That's cool, right? But like, we don't have public transit, we don't have Uber, we don't have Lyft, no. And so a lot of the social service agencies here in this very spread out rural community, they call it the Tri-County area. There's 3 counties that are constantly dealing with transportation issues. A lot of what these social service agencies have realized over the years that they have to include in their budgets, we're going to pay for staff to go to community member homes. We can get them to the community member homes. That's going to take away the transportation barrier. We can do that, right? So the case for really harsh winters, it's too cold. You couldn't have people biking, walking. Nope, not possible. There is no public transit, so it's not about paying for bus cards or anything like that. It's not about reimbursing for Ubers and Lyfts. Nope, not an option. So they are really good at building that story in the narrative for what the barrier is and how programmatically they've designed something to overcome that as a community. Been pretty common for the solution for how it's been talked about for a while. But where does that go wrong? If in the budget, as someone's building the budget, they have not put in the travel reimbursement for the staff. All of a sudden now, if you have a 0 in the travel line item for the budget cost, what is the grant maker going to say? How are those social workers? How are those case managers? How are those people getting to the community member homes? How's that going to happen? I don't see any money, whether it's my money or anybody's money. I don't see any money there. That's a pretty big question. It's an inconsistency. And that inconsistency makes the grant maker start to question other numbers, other details that they have read in the proposal. Well, wait a second, if that doesn't align between the two, and then they start picking at other details. And so you might lose a point or two if it's being scored. You might lose the verbal willingness to speak up and advocate on your behalf of somebody in a Zoom meeting or a real room. All of a sudden, it doesn't feel consistent between what you told as a story in your narrative and what your budget said. All because of the travel line item. Is that heartbreaking to anybody else? Why for yes and for no? I know you're like, Diane, that's rhetorical. Yes. And I know, I'm not saying that's fair, but it has to be a consistent story. And those are the sort of nuances that you're looking for, why you want to have that budget designed and ready before you sit down to do the application, so that when you go to translate it into whatever the grant maker is asking for, you are making sure that it always matches this. The risk and how this happens, the story that I just told you, where folks might leave out travel, the most common reason that that happens to an organization is that they open up a grant application and they say, we're going to apply for this. Let's build a grant budget for this. And because they're not thinking about all their costs, because they're not thinking about what is ideal for them, a very well-intentioned staff person, or even a team, a pair of folks, a whole team, might do something like, well, oh, oops, we left travel out. But it's 1 point here or there that's making the difference between who's getting funded or not. And so something that might seem as insignificant as a travel line item, that's the inconsistency that turns into a no. So how do you get through a review like this? You need to find someone in your organization or a friend of the organization, like a collaborative partner or a stakeholder of some sort, that's willing to read the whole thing, knowing that the type of feedback that you want is about alignment between narrative responses and everything budget related. That is a very different type of feedback that you're asking for than saying, can you please read this and let me know if you have any suggestions to make it stronger? People are going to be thinking about commas. People are going to be thinking about word choice, unless you specifically tell someone reviewing your application that you want a review of alignment between application narrative and budget for consistency. 99.97% of the time, that is not going to be what they're reading for. You've got to really be focused in your ask for feedback. Now, I want to let you test your muscles a little bit. And I want to show you some different ideas. All right, so we said no to variables. And we're thinking about what your budget justification or what your narrative might sound like. I just gave you one travel example. I'm going to show you another travel example. And it's because it doesn't matter if it's a big cost line item or a small cost item. Any of these could be the issue. So on the screen, if you read along, yes, I know there's a gray X over it because we don't want to do this, but I want you to think about what it says in number 1. Mileage within the 4 counties participating in the project. This is actually a different multi-county area than what I was talking about for myself. They're 4 different community. But anyway, they said mileage to within the 4 counties participating in the project. Mileage was billed at the IRS standard rate. You know, this is a slightly old example. It's 56 cents a mile. That's not what it is today. But so they tell us our IRS rate is 56 cents a mile. They tell us that the total over the 5 years. They tell us how much for each of the years. I love that they showed what it was for each year. Love that. Love that they gave us the total. Love that they told us the IRS mileage amount. But why did I put an X over this? Could you just real quick type in the chat box for me? Don't get a calculator. Don't open your phone. Could you just real quick tell me exactly, scientifically, accurately, how many miles a staff member will drive at 56 cents a mile if I give them $1,762.56? I'll wait just while you type real quick. No, I'm joking. Don't type anything. I know some of you are really good at mental math and you're like, oh, I generally have an idea. But when I said the scientifically accurate answer, many of us were like, oh, today that's not my mental math strength. Absolutely not. No, I wanted to get my calculator. So if you wanted to get your calculator, I think you're in good company. It seems like it's got all the right details. But if we were to write it out in a formula, we don't know how many miles. So there is a big unknown variable hanging out in this section. We made them do algebra. And actually, if you read number 2 in this example, it's another example where there is algebra being required of the reviewer. This time it was about lodging. Lodging at the GSA rate, $89 a night. Okay, good. So we've got one piece of information. We can again see how much per year. It's 5 years. We can see the total. How many nights? Like, okay, let's see, 89. I'm dividing 2,403 by 80. Nope, I can't do that mental math now. Couldn't do mental math that intense a minute ago, still can't now. I'm grabbing my calculator. If as a grant reviewer, I'm reaching for my calculator, we're in trouble. You don't want your reviewers picking up their calculator. They're distracted. Now they're not engaged in your story anymore. Now they're over here checking your math to see if it makes sense. That's not engaging. That's not going to get you all the points. That's not going to help them advocate for you. On the other hand, oh, look at that. There's a little star next to it, and it tells us that travel costs include mileage to and from the client homes within the 3 counties. Oh, doesn't that sound familiar to the story I just told? Yes, it does. Staff will drive a total of 5,000 miles per year for the project. Mileage is reimbursed for staff at the IRS standard rate of 63 cents a mile. And then, for good measure, this is like the TLDR version. Too long, didn't read. I know, I'm like, I have teenagers. I know all the acronyms. I'm like, I got it. TLDR, 5,000 miles times 63 cents per mile equals $3,150. Now, you know, the only thing that would make it even better for me, like this is for me like a 9.5 out of 10. Love it's all that's there. The $3,150 was only visible to me in the equation. I'm sure it's visible on the budget form itself, but wouldn't it have been nice if it said like at the beginning of the sentence that $3,150 in travel costs include? That would have made it a 10 for me. It was so close, but I still love it as an example. That was, I just say it twice. Can't go wrong. Once the narrative version, once the formula version. Grantmakers can, that way they read whichever version they like. They both say the same thing. They're reinforcing for each other. I love that. So that one, yeah, that one made me very, very happy. Now let's look at this one. I'm a big fan, as is my entire team, of using a simple chart or table when formatting allows. Don't worry about the text in the paragraph. I'm just giving you the setup that this is how it was laid out. They had to talk about all these different types of costs. How much per family, how many families were going to be served, lots of stuff. What I really want you to look at is that chart at the bottom. It's showing how much was the request per grant year. There were 4 grant years. Now, if you look, year 1 is a slightly higher amount than year 2 and year 3. And wait a second, year 4 is a lot less. If the parentheses 9 months was not under Y4, year 4, you'd be like, huh, I wonder how in the world are they doing it for so much less in year 4? That's so weird. That would be the sort of question a grant maker would ask. But because the time for like the award period was shorter in year 4 for whatever reason, oh, now the grant maker understands why is it not equal? I'm certain somewhere in the budget, it would show that there's some sort of like year 1 startup cost for why that first year is higher. Like I feel like that's probably the case. I'm showing you a very small screenshot of something that was like a 10-page budget narrative. But that table made it so much faster for a reviewer to digest what otherwise would have been a big paragraph. And honestly, right, like there's a lot to read and reviewers might get lost. They might not see it. So even if you say it in a longhand sentence, full form, I would put a second table, not a second table. I would put a table in there as a second way to present the information so that reviewers who digest information in different ways can see it in the way that is best for them. Another way, like that table, I liked it. I really did. It was like a 9 for me out of 10. For me, it would have been a 10 if it showed, see how I've got federal resources, and then I have another row below it that says non-federal resources, and then a total across the bottom. This, for me, even if there was no federal match required, which actually was what I was showing you, but you didn't know that there was no federal match required, by showing zeros across non-federal resources. Wow, isn't that clear? Zeros. Now I know that there is nothing. Versus if I don't have a row there, I'd be like, wait, is there one? Should I flip to find it? So simple charts and tables are almost always going to help your reviewers have increased clarity about your budgets so that they won't be grabbing their calculator. They won't be looking for additional information. They won't be flipping back and forth in pages to try and understand how did you get all of these numbers to equal that. So in the budget storytelling guide, Brooke had linked to it earlier in the public chat for you. It's in your shared notes as part of the course. I've got a few different examples to show you some different ways that you might consider building some of these templates. And I always defer to whatever the grant maker gives as an example or template. So some grant makers will say, here's a template for your consideration. That's grant maker speak for please use this. That's what they're trained on. Don't use something else, use that. If some grant makers give you an example, they're not calling it a template, they're not calling it a requirement, but that's also grant maker speak for we like this one. Could you please use this? The benefit to using their structures is that they are designed to help you not leave variables in your equations for them. If you fill out all the information, it will usually, not always, it will usually answer all the questions for showing your work for your equation. These two, again, very basic justifications, we gave them as examples so that you could think about if a grant maker doesn't give you a template, what you could build instead that would work potentially for your application. Now I see you've got a comment here from Russell. Let's take a look at that. And the Q&A is open if you have any outstanding questions or comments for me about budget. Russell said, what gives me gray hairs is working with partners and they don't tell you which staff, their staff pay rates, how much time's dedicated, until almost the last minute. I feel you on that one. Doing a collaboration thing right now. There is a zoo involved. Their information was one line. We knew the total costs until today. Now, thankfully, it's not going in tomorrow or even later this week. It's still not going until next week, but it was just a number. And we're like, but what does that number represent? Yeah, I hear collaborative grant applications, subcontractors, contractors, do they have to fill out a form? Do they not? I agree with you. It is a really stressful part of bigger applications like that. I usually like to ask them early on and make it some sort of early deadline, try to make it some mandated thing that everybody agrees to. But you're right. Russell, yes, I feel your stress. If you get the magic solution, could you please let me know? Because sometimes it stresses us too. All right. I don't see any questions in the public chat, but you can email me questions after. You can message me on social media, wherever you want to connect, chat, ask questions, share tips and tricks. Happy to connect with you there myself as well. But we are at the end of our 90 minutes, and I could talk about budgets all day. Brooke can attest to that, but I know we've got a feedback survey to talk about, and you've got to get back to the rest of your day. So thank you so much for being so engaged in today's conversation about budgets. I really appreciate it.
Yay, thank you so much for this incredible presentation, Diane. You can see why we call her the goddess of grants here at the Native Learning Center. I did throw in the link to the webinar feedback survey. If y'all don't mind taking a few minutes to do that, it is anonymous. You don't have to worry about your name or your email being attached to it. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes, and it's just helping us know what we can improve upon and what is working well for you already. We do share the feedback with instructors, so it helps everybody all around if you don't mind doing that for us. We hope you can join us for our next webinar. That's going to be this week on Thursday. And this is going to be the second part for the Developing Engagement Plans for Clean Energy Projects series with Michelle Holliday and Catherine Cole. This one's going to be specifically about stakeholder identification and mapping. So if you go into that courses section I told you about earlier, there is a whole course called Developing Engagement Plans for Clean Energy Projects, and you could review the recording from the first session that they held back in October. You can check out this as well as our other recorded webinars on our YouTube channel. We do have a playlist called the Cathedra Webinar Archive. It goes back for about 2 years. YouTube is a free resource for you to use, so I encourage you to check out what all we have in the webinar archive. And feel free to check out our other upcoming training events. We post about them to our social media quite a bit. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn and Twitter. And if you are a podcast listener, we have our own, the Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast. You can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts. Or if you like watching the interviews with our special guests, we do post those recordings to our YouTube channel as well. That's on a separate playlist. But otherwise, that is all that we have for you today, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Diane, for the incredible presentation. The links that y'all need are in the chat or in the shared notes section. And then just to make it easy, I'm going to put that webinar feedback survey in there one more time. But I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording, but I am going to leave the webinar open so that y'all have access to all of those links. Thanks again, guys.